to set the background a little bit, these concepts that I'm going to be talking about, they are practical insights. One of the things that we're proud of is that there's a lot of theory and books written about excellence and innovation, and you can, spend endless hours debating the definition of certain words. But everything that I'm going to be talking about here has this practical band that I'll start by saying that there's no such thing as a visionary leader. And that's going to sound a little controversial, because what we have found in practice is that we have worked with the so-called visionary leaders. And what we have learned is that they are not visionary in the sense that they can predict the future. Nobody can predict the future. In fact, I often say there are only two types of people who predict the future: those who don't know, and those who don't know that they don't know. And the only way to predict the future is truly to create it, and innovation is a mechanism for that. But the point being that these lessons are from real practitioners, over 30,000 excellence and innovation leaders that were not visionary per se. They experiment constantly. They find out what works, they find out what doesn't work, they stop doing what doesn't work, they keep on doing what works, but most important, they understand why it works, and then they scale that. So these are very empirical, experimentally driven type of leaders that we have had the privilege of partnering with for the past over 25 years now, and across all industries. And it's a combination of the leadership roles that I had in great corporations, but also the collaboration that we have had with hundreds of organizations across industries, and this practitioners that we derive these lessons from. So, when I talk about excellence and innovation, any other definitions, I'm really leaning on these practical insights that we got from them. So with that in the back, let's talk about excellence innovation briefly.
Please.
We are not really, excellence innovation is not something that I thought was something that we should pursue upfront. It's something that came about from this experimentation, if you will. And what we find in organizations is that they tend to be they tend to be on this path to pursue greatness in whatever it is that they do,
right,
to be dominant in their fields. And this applies to organizations, but also to professionals and individuals. But in this pursuit of greatness, what we have discovered is that there are a number of organizations that pursue excellence as a path to pursue greatness. And in their view of excellence, excellence is about having systems in place. Excellence is about having clear standards of performance. And through systems, they meet and exceed the standards of performance consistently. And they have kind of a continuous improvement cycle to meet and exceed these high performance standards that they set. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that, because that's sounds like a plausible path towards greatness. But if you only do that and you don't innovate, eventually you become obsolete, because there's just so much that you can squeeze out of the current systems without innovating. Exactly. That's the world of excellence. Well, so people say, okay, Jose, so maybe the real great enduring organizations of our time, they're not the most excellent ones. They need to have some level of excellence, but they're really like the most innovative, right? So the most innovative must be the great enduring organizations of our time. And what we have discovered in practice is that that's not true. And this is probably the biggest surprise, because people think that, well, if it's not excellent, so it must be innovation. Innovation then is the path to create the future, is the path to get to this enduring greatness. And that's not the case. And here's why. What we have observed on the so-called most innovative organizations, that most of them you never hear about after 5 or 10 years, because they die. And the reason they die is that they fall in love with innovation or technology for its own sake. And they continuously innovate, but they do not innovate consistent with their purpose. And they're chronically inconsistent. So they pride themselves of being nimble and innovative, and they're constantly changing. But if you look at them over a long period of time, they're constantly changing in a zigzag pattern on a flat line. because they are just like, they fell in love with innovation per se, and they are not chronically consistent with their purpose. So it's neither the most excellent nor the most innovative organization. That's the great enduring organizations of our time. What we have found is that the great enduring organizations of our time, they're a very small fraction of this total. And that if you look at the small group, what you find is that they have a perfect blend of excellence and innovation. Now, Tina, this is not easy because the forces of excellence and the forces of innovation, they pull in very different directions. In the world of excellence, you're trying to squeeze efficiencies out of horses. In the world of innovation, you realize that I can design cars by squeezing efficiencies out of horses. So these two worlds, they are pulling very different directions, but it is the intelligent blending of these forces that pull in different directions that make these organizations great and enduring. And the way it works is that they have a foundation of excellence. They have high performance standards that they're constantly trying to meet and achieve and surpass those performance standards. They're constantly evaluating their systems and optimizing their systems, but yet they are comfortably, they're unsatisfied and uncomfortable with the status quo. And they look at the excellence that they have created from a distance and they say, there's got to be a better way. Not a 5 or 10% better way, but a completely different way, a new perspective. But here's the catch: when they find the new perspective, which is the innovation, they find that small innovation. And what makes them great enduring organizations is the fact that now they don't just continuously innovate, they scale the innovation that they have created better than anybody else. And that's the trick. And here's the catch: do you know how they scale the innovation they created better than anybody else? By applying the principles of excellence.
That's where we're going.
Innovation they created.
Okay.
So this sounds incredibly simple, but it's most difficult thing to do from a cultural perspective, because the cultures of excellence and innovation are at odds with each other. So I would summarize that by saying that they are master of contradictions. They're able to blend forces that pull in very different directions and just the right amounts so that they can achieve greatness.
Okay, so I have a couple clarifying questions I really want to ask you about this, because and tell me if I'm hearing this correctly, it's that as excellence is driving the efficiencies in the systems, and innovation is driving new horizons. Innovation is then, you can only scale innovation by using the principles of excellence, which then get back into those systems. So then,
well, everything you said is just about right. The only note there in the end is that you may be able to scale innovation without excellence, but it's not sustainable.
But it's not sustainable, right?
Yes.
You go off the board.
You may have a one-off, an aha moment,
Right.
a one glory type of thing. Any organization can do that. But the question is, can you do that sustainably and systematically? And most organizations cannot do that, because that does require the excellence principles applied to innovation.
Okay. So would you say that a bridge between the innovation and the excellence would be what would be called business transformation? Because business transformation, from what I understand, is a definition. And one of the reasons I'm spending a little time on this is because so much jargon gets bounced around. I think it always is great to kind of clarify things. So if does business transformation, if we throw that in here, and it may not even be relevant, my understanding is that is shifting those systems or coming up with new systems completely from scratch that then may impact a company in an entirely new way. Is that relevant inside what we're talking about here?
Yes, it is. And transformation is really this journey of bringing together the mindsets, the principles, and the mechanisms of excellence and innovation in this case, and transforming them into actions that create value. So the transformation is more about the journey that you have to go into, because here's what happens. At the starting point, you have organizations that are either on the excellence side or on the innovation side. They will be stronger one side or the other. And the transformation is, as part of this journey, what you become as an organization and as a culture and as a leader at the individual level, is that what you become is very important. And what you become is that you become someone who understands the complexity of and the intelligent blending of these principles of excellence and innovation to achieve greatness. And that journey is the way that I would look at the transformation, because you start at a point where honestly you're almost at odds, because cultures and individuals, they resist what they most need to change. And we don't admit this, but that's the reality, right? We all have these blind spots, and we don't need this. So if I talk about a company that's excellent about innovations, like, oh, we don't need that, that's fluffy. If I talk about a company that's very innovative about excellence, they'll say, oh, this is so old school, that's not what we need. So they will resist what they most need to achieve this greatness. And it's about overcoming that resistance over time. That is what how I would look at the transformation. And it's more not just what we achieve, but most importantly, what we become as part of that journey.
So what motivates a company to go on a journey like this?
That's a great question. And this journey only makes sense if you have a clear purpose that is worthwhile. Because the journey of excellence and innovation is the farthest thing from being fun. It's not. It's incredibly hard. And then people go through this and I look back at them and say, sometimes senior leaders, you get to the kind of a big presentation, senior leaders are, so did you guys have fun on doing this? I was like, I want to hear this answer. And most of the leaders that I hear back say, I wouldn't call it fun, but it's probably one of the most rewarding things I've done professionally and personally, because that transformation is painful. So I don't think people even know what they're signing up for. But once so the question to your basic question, why do people even engage on this? Honestly, I think that I fool them a little bit into this, because I make it very interesting and exciting. Say the blending of excellence and innovation, the pursuit of greatness. These things sound awesome. Who doesn't want to pursue greatness? But once you start going through the process, you realize that it's incredibly hard. And by the way, the one word that connects excellence and innovation is discipline. And who wants to have discipline? But here's the deal. Discipline, in the way that we look at it, is not following a regimented set of rules. Anybody can do that. Discipline is chronic consistency with your purpose. Chronic consistency with your purpose is discipline. As a matter of fact, one of the key research lines on this is that when we look at great enduring organizations and the mediocre ones, the signature of mediocrity is not an unwillingness to change. The signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency. And chronic inconsistency with what? With your purpose. So you have to have a very clear purpose as an organization. And as a leader or individual, you have to have a purpose that hopefully aligns with the purpose of the organization. Because if there is not that alignment, it's going to be a very rough ride.
Right. And this is where I think, pointing to discipline, it's no different in a company than it is with an individual as we're developing. And I love the word discipline. I've had my own transformational relationship with that word, because like most people, I was thinking, it means something hard. It means something rigid, but the origin of the word under disciple, you're devoted to something. You're devoted to something that is bigger than you, that you can see a vision of, and that brings that purpose into play. And that's bring that purpose into play. So
listen, you're already at the advanced level on my sessions on pursuit of purpose, because most people do not have the insight that you have just shared with us. That's awesome.
That's the world I swim in. So, in creating psychological safety through voice, through communication, through all these things, and then connecting that to purpose, and then and so on. But this is really fascinating. So now we're dealing with a collective of individuals, and we're dealing with a culture. So you mentioned that there's resistance. What are some of the forms of resistance that commonly come up?
Well, so there are all sorts of forms of resistance. It depends on what you're trying to pursue. Sometimes they're very specific things, but in general, again, whatever it is that you're trying to pursue that you most need to change becomes typically the biggest resistance. That it's like telling a smoker that we're going to go into this journey to stop smoking. I mean, you're going to have some resistance, and you can talk about all the benefits and the wonderful science behind it. It's not a rational journey and decision-making process. Our decisions are really built on feelings, and feelings are created by irrational thoughts, not by rational thoughts. So you cannot rationalize this journey. You have to guide people through and have them discover by themselves to a large extent. So it's a long journey. You have to, I think I think that there are 4 traits that we have identified on leaders who are successful in this journey, and we can go back to that later. But in summary, they are that they have purpose alignment, the purpose of the organization and their own purpose as individuals and professionals, they are in alignment. And then there are 3 specific traits that separate the great enduring leaders of excellence and innovation versus the others. And these traits are, they have tremendous passion for what they do. And passion here is less of romanticized love and a lot more like an arranged marriage. Okay. It's like they work their face off on things, and over time they overcome challenges and they develop an appreciation for it. So that's passion. And then there is discipline, and discipline is consistency with purpose. And then resilience. And resilience is not about being stubborn and never quitting. It is about overcoming the challenges collaboratively. And if unable to do so, having the ability to pivot and taking the longer road. And you take the longer road because that purpose that you're pursuing is worthwhile. So purpose, passion, discipline, resilience are the character traits, if you will, that emerge out of these great leaders. So in terms of resistance in organizations, the first resistance is that, there is resistance to basic change, that there is no need to change anything, that we're fine. We got to understand that human beings are not wired for change. Human beings and organizations are wired for safety and predictability and reliability. So change is a very natural process for us, and transformation, you're trying to transform me, which feels like you're going to distort me into something else. And which is kind of true. And so who wants to go for that? So there's a natural, antagonism to that. And then in the way that you see this represented in organizations is that, manifested, I should say, in organizations is that, especially, I'm a little bit biased because working with high performance teams and individuals, a lot of technical folks as well. So that's probably the majority of the organizations and leaders I work with. These are very smart people, and very smart people are incredibly good at being passive aggressive. They can destroy whatever you're trying to do in very smart ways. They sabotage things very, very elegantly. And so that is the biggest resistance, I think. Sometimes is the invisible resistance. It's what's going on behind the scenes. It's not out there. But and by the way, to break through that, so how to overcome that resistance? I say you have to develop this improvement and innovation venture capitalist approach. And that's summarized by saying work with these people, and you let go of the jargon, let go of methods, and you find where they're coming from. You have empathy for their perspective, and then you get close to them from a relationship standpoint. And then when you get there, you create the most value in the shortest time and simplest means. Create the most value in the shortest time and simplest means. And that's the way that you're going to get them on board over time. And it takes time. You have to be very resilient in this journey.
So that brings me back to a term that we work with a lot, and that which is psychological safety. And I know this is being bantered about a lot right now in current media, but it's not new by any means. And we could call it trust. We can call it, buy-in. We can call it, relationship, all of those things. But what it basically comes down to is that somebody feels okay enough with you, your expertise, your methodology, your relationship. There's a number of factors in there to set something aside that they are concerned about, and set that aside for the sake of being aligned with that purpose. And so one of the things going along with that is, what are some of the ways that you think that organizations effectively create communications, or don't create communications, that foster that type of that type of relationships with each other, or with for example, an outside organization like yourself consulting?
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot in there.
There's a
packed
lot in
there.
there.
So
That was like four questions.
I'm gonna try and
Un-
pick a few
Pick a
parts of
thread.
it.
Pick a thread.
And here's a disclaimer that I must say, that I must put out there. Sometimes anybody listening to this or maybe reading a script about this, be careful about picking any of the components and running with it, because a lot of times
Yes.
people want like the simple solution to the complex problem. I love that too, but it's rarely the case that the simple solution is the right solution. So it's usually a combination of elegant solutions that have some simple approaches, but also you must understand the interconnectedness of these components. And these components in isolation, they may not work. It's how you put them together. So there are a lot of components on what you mentioned there, and I'll go into some of them. First of all, what we have learned, and this is not just us, you can look at research. Steve Johnson has written books about this, and it's fantastic about how he look across societies and the greatest catalysts for innovation acceleration. And you know what was discovered? And we know this from a practical standpoint is true. We have experienced this with our organizations that succeed in this journey. The way that you accelerate innovation is not just by giving people financial incentives. That doesn't work. You accelerate innovation specifically by creating an environment where great people and great ideas can connect. And that psychological safety that you're talking about is critically important, because you know the essence of innovation is the ability to look at problems from a different perspective. And the counter to that is that one of the biggest fears that you're going to have in organizations is the fear of failure. So people are, on one side, people are told, oh yeah, be creative, innovative, look at problems from different perspectives, but don't say anything stupid, okay? It's like, oh, hold on. It's like, so how can I look at things from a different perspective, which will be unusual when I look at things from a different perspective? Some of the things that I'm going to come up with may not be ordinary. And then people are going to be a little scared of that, because when you're trying to do something different, you're risking something there. And in organizations where there's tremendous fear of failure, and that's most of every organization, as human beings, we're wired for fear of failure. We need to, the one way of countering that fear of failure is, first of all, there are many things to do. One of them is to define failure as a spectrum, as opposed to an absolute, live or die type of thing. And the other one is to create an environment with psychological safety, is to create an environment where great people and great ideas can connect, collaborate, trust, and communicate openly without fear of retaliation of some sort. And for that, we need the development of what we call collaborative leadership. And collaborative leadership requires you to surround yourself with people with different perspectives, who are willing to voice those different perspectives without fear of retaliation. So all of that is about building an environment where great ideas and great people can connect, an environment of psychological safety where you can experiment, and it's okay to do that. So and communication is a big piece of this. You have to start building that environment, and you have to communicate the principles, around this environment. Collaboration, trust, fail often to succeed sooner, and all this other principles that allow for a highly collaborative environment, which is not common in organizations at any level.
I could see, going back to something you said right at the beginning about innovation and excellence often seeming at odds with each other, that you want to have this efficient, goal focused, meet your measures kind of systems. And at the same time, if you are working in the innovation space where you have to experiment and diverge in your thinking in new ways, that's not necessarily going to bear fruit anytime soon, and is going to be highly failure oriented.
Yes.
Because you're going to have to ideate, experiment, fail, tweak, go back again. And it seems very at odds. So I can see where that would quite honestly freak people out in
Yes,
in a lot of senses if the systems that you have in place don't have the latitude for that kind of a appreciation of a process that the creative process, the innovation process takes. So
absolutely.
yeah, so is there so it diving a little bit deeper into communication, are there any kind of best practices that you have seen or helped create for companies to have communication structures that help ease some of this transition and development over time?
Excellent. Let's talk about communication. But before we talk about communication, let me give you kind of a somewhat of a mental model on the organizations that do this very well. How do they get to communication?
Right.
And here's what typically happens in the organizations that do it well. They have a clear purpose. They have a strong set of core values. They have to figure that out first. They have certain beliefs about the world and their business. They have to work on their mindsets. So, for example, if I want to be more innovative, I need to create a mindset of innovation. I need to create a mindset of excellence. And then on those mindsets, I need to know what are the principles, the real principles, not the theoretical principles that some guy wrote in a book but he never really practiced it. It's something that people did. What are the actual principles that work? And there are a lot of principles of innovation, a lot of principles of excellence, principles of whatever mindset you're trying to develop. And the principles are not enough. You still need now to develop the mechanisms in the organization that translate the principles into action. Because a lot of senior leaders like to talk about principles like platitudes. Oh, you are encouraged to be innovative in whatever you do here at our company. And then if I'm a professional there, what does that mean? And how do I really translate my ideas into a project or something that's going to change the way we do business? And that's not obvious for most organizations because they lack those mechanisms. So you need to have all those things from purpose, values, beliefs, mindsets, principles, mechanisms that translate the principles into action, because that action is a set of behaviors that will shape your culture, because culture is just the observed behaviors that we have in an organization. So you're setting those behaviors if you follow that path. Wonderful. But now, how do you actually do this, Jose? So one such mechanism is that you have to inspire self-motivated individuals to pursue greatness through the work that they do, align their personal purpose with the professional purpose that they have in the purpose of that organization. Okay, and how do I do that? You do that by creating in your organization a meritocracy of ideas with clear execution mechanisms, translating that to, I am in the organization and I know exactly what I need to do to have my idea heard, so that someone can help me, not just criticize my idea, that's too easy. Help me nurture and grow this idea until it is ready to be executed on. So you have to create a meritocracy of ideas with clear execution mechanisms to identify, prioritize, and then execute on what creates value for that organization aligned with that purpose. Wonderful. So you have to have that, and that's no trivial matter. You create that. Once you create that, you need to communicate to your organization. Hey, we're different. We have a meritocracy of ideas with clear execution mechanisms. Anywhere in this organization, regardless of level, can participate in this. This is a breakthrough already. So you have to communicate that. Now, that's one piece of the communication. The other piece of the communication is that now these ideas that got prioritized, and now they have small teams working on them to implement really significant improvements and innovations for our organization, internally, externally, for all stakeholders. So once these small teams implement new ideas that create value, which is the true definition of innovation, the implementation of new ideas that create value. Once they implement these new ideas that create value, that's another huge opportunity for communication, Tina. In most organizations, the people who work there don't know that these things are going on. Why? Well, because nobody's talking about it, because we're talking about the external things, which is important, that the company is doing. Some of our future strategies, we talk about all these future strategies, and we're not talking about what's happening today, about this team that is Rajan and Tina and Jose work on this multi-million-dollar project in 3 months, and they implemented this, but nobody knows that we did this. And then and by the way, and once they see that it's us, the three of us who did this, not some guru from Google that came on board time, but it's these people who work in our company. We're now democratizing innovation in our company because these are the people who work with us. And there are no geniuses from another dimension. They are innovators right here. So that democratization of innovation is very important. And the communication around the teams on who they are and what they did and how they did it is instrumental to amplify innovation in an organization. And this, Tina, is sorely missing because there are so many great things that happen in every organization that nobody in the organization knows about. I mean, the department that they work with knows about, the direct reports and know about it, but across the organization, people don't know about it. And there are tremendous opportunities to leverage some of these lessons in other parts of the organization to find. And then the message that the innovators in our organization are Jose, Tina, and Rajen here. We are the innovators, not someone from another company. We are the innovators. So people look at Jose and say, hey, did you see that Jose was part of the team that did like this incredible innovation project for the company? Jose did this. I mean, I'm talking about Jose. I work with Jose. Jose is as dumb as a door. If Jose did it, anybody can do it. It's like, yes, Bill, anybody can do it and that's okay. I'm joking here, but the point being that, well, partially joking, that the point being is that if I can do it, anybody in this company can do it. It's not like some person who came from another dimension and invented a new thing.
Yeah.
And this piece is sorely missing. We don't know about that because that's the way that you get more people to engage in the program, to say, hey, you know what? How do I get my innovations into this company? And talking about engagement, you want to have someone engaged? Think about someone who is coming to work and their ideas are being experimented with and their voice is being heard. You don't get any greater engagement than that. That's truly the highest level of engagement you're going to have with someone aligning their purpose with the work that they do.
So for example, podcasting in what we do provides a framework for communication. It's a medium, whether that is internal communications, it is marketing and external communications, limited series, ongoing communications. It's really about authentic dissemination of ideas and information. That's really the heart of podcasting across the board. And you and I have had some chats about, boy, this sounds like a good idea to be inside of more companies. So you've already said that you feel like this is a valuable framework. Can you give me a sense of where in some of the scenarios you've worked with, we could apply this type of medium that you think it would be extremely valuable?
Yes. And the key word that you use there is authenticity. And I absolutely love that. It's a wonderful way to communicate excellence and innovation and value creation for organizations and teams in an authentic way. Because what happens often is that organizations get overly formal about these things. Yes. They get stiff, like, oh, okay, let's talk about this project. And then, well, we have to write a script because it's going to be on a newsletter, and then we'll have an interview. And they make this like, this overly produced, interview with someone. And you miss the opportunity to connect with people and the real professionals as they are in doing the work. And then, so there's multiple levels here of communication. I'll get to podcasts. First of all, the majority of organizations do a lousy job of sharing. Forget about podcasts, even about writing a letter or summarizing a project to the rest of the organization. Any form of written or verbal communication or audio, video, I mean, there's nothing there. I mean, really, you finish a project, you kind of, okay, the next project, go work on the next project. And nobody knows what happened other than the people who are personally impacted by the project. So there's a missed opportunity there, a huge missed opportunity. As a matter of fact, when I talked about excellence, innovation, acceleration, there's a lot of methodology behind that, but I often tell senior leaders that you have to identify the communication specialist for this journey for you. And I'm not talking about someone who from corporate communications who is disconnected from the work that the people are actually doing in the field.
Right.
I need to be someone who is dedicated to this team, to this small team that's doing that is managing the program for excellence and innovation across the organization, and really getting on the ground with the teams and finding out what they're doing, how they're doing, and recognizing the incredible talents and work and impact. So most organizations don't have any of that. And then if you go to the next level, well, they have an internal communication specialist, for example, or a communication specialist, because some of the stuff is external as well. And that's the next level. Very few have that. And then but at that level, sometimes they get overly formal and they lack authenticity. And what happens is that, I'll give you an example. I was in one company where I was a corporate leader for excellence and innovation, and we did over 2,000 innovation projects per year implemented, over $1 billion in additional earnings for the corporation. So the question is, before I was there, and I'm not tapping on my back for that, it's the principle that was important. But before I was there was like one main event at the end of the year when we had like this excellence awards thing. And then we had an event, which was nice, but it was like overly formal, one event per year, really, for 2,000 projects. So how can you recognize 2,000 projects in one event? You can't. So what we did is that, when I got in there, I noticed the need. So, okay, let's communicate internally. Traditional methods, just have more articles written about the teams, pictures of the teams, internal site communications, basic stuff. And then the next level is what you're talking about. Identify some of those teams and some of those projects. Can we have a podcast, just talk about it? What worked well, what didn't work well, what kind of, and then in a more authentic style. And that's what I love about podcasts. I think you can make it less formal. And I think you connect better with the audience when you do that, especially an internal audience, because it's unscripted and more real. And honestly, innovation is not this beautiful flowing thing that you see. It's kind of a messy process. And it's important that people understand that they can understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of this process of innovation, for example. And podcasts allow for that. In my opinion, again, depends on how you do the podcast, but the ones that I'm thinking about here is they are more authentic, they are less formal, they are faster, so that the information is flowing much earlier. One example on that, one important note on that, is that it's not uncommon for project teams in an organization that have like a meritocracy of ideas with clear execution mechanisms. I cannot tell you how many times it happens that project teams have worked on projects that implemented solutions that 18 months to 3 years later, senior leaders in the organization are thinking, well, it would be good if we did something about call it whatever, like the high turnover rate in this area of the company. And then I say, sir, that happened like 18 months ago. A team already did that 18 months ago, and we can show you the results. But it shows you that it takes forever for senior leaders to know something that's going on in their own company. And then if you had a podcast mechanism as one example, you can just be talking about these things as they happen. And you don't have to wait 18 months as a senior leader to know what happened in your organization. That's downright embarrassing. I cannot tell you how many strategic initiatives come from senior leaders. And then we can go through in an organization that has a very broad meritocracy of ideas. Most of those things that senior leaders are coming up with, like smart strategies, are things that have been happening already in the organization for several months. And
there's no way that they can know every single thing that's going on without a mechanism to kind of keep them up to date that is timely. And it sounds like some of the communication mechanisms that you see a lot are either non-existent, or they're so after the fact and so formalized that pieces get heavily missing. But it mostly sounds like there's just not a lot of timely, up to the minute types of almost news reporting. The difference between doing kind of an annual report or an annual meeting versus kind of, the weekly news.
Beautiful. I was thinking about that. Wouldn't it be nice to just have a weekly podcast on what's going on in the world of innovation at pick a company,
Exactly.
And then we know what's going on. We in this excellence innovation acceleration journey, we have this principles. One of the principles that we apply that for engagement that we find is very important is that you have to engage what we call the three H's, letter H. You have to engage the head, you have to engage the hands if you can, but you must engage the heart as well. So it's the head, the hands, and the heart. So and podcasts is a great way of engaging the head, of engaging the heart. The hand, you can argue that maybe no, because I'm at a distance. If it's me, you're engaging because I speak with my hands. But but the point being is that it's such an engaging form of communication, and the authenticity that comes with it. And I think it's important that, you know, whoever listens to us now or see a script about this, that keep the word up front, authenticity, because sometimes people take a good idea and they distort it. Like, oh yeah, let's do a bobcast. Oh, a podcast. Let's do a podcast, Bob. That's what I was thinking. So, and Bob goes out to do a podcast and then spends like 2 months developing a script for a podcast because, you know, it's overly formal and it's not really authentic at that point. So it's very important that whoever takes these ideas understand that the key principles here behind this podcast is authenticity. It's the speed of information to the audience. It's connecting with the real practitioners in the organization, not the department heads or the leaders who are overseeing the teams, but the real participants in this process.
People who are really involved. You know, a lot of the podcasts we produce that are external podcasts, some of the concerns that companies have when they come to us are about not so much sounding bad, I'll put that in air quotes, but, you know, how are they going to be perceived? How is the communication going to land? Making sure that they're well understood. And I know that's actually what leads to things becoming overly scripted and overly produced. So for something that was going to be kind of internal communication based, what might be some of those, going back to those areas of resistance, where could safety be created? Where could that relationship be created to deal with what might come up? So said in a simpler way, if podcasting is a framework that could enhance communication so that we're disseminating excellence and innovation more effectively through a company, what might be some of the concerns or barriers to implementing such a framework?
You touched on something there that I think is essential. Good intentions that go bad because people start because of the fear of failure that they have, including the podcast. So, you know, trust and fear of failure, these are 2 topics that are very important. We're trying to think about this. We're trying to build a culture of excellence and innovation. So should we have a podcast that is like perfect all the time, that's fully scripted, that everybody says all the right things in the right time? Not every failure is critical. But someone said something that's not right in the podcast. That's fine, Rick. The next one we say that we made a mistake in the last podcast and we keep going. So this is part of building that culture, by the way. I understand that if you're doing this externally and you don't control the distribution of the podcast, that can be dangerous, right? Because you don't have a chance to cover something that you did. But specifically focusing on internal podcasts, and I think there is a great need and impact for internal podcasts. Those internal podcasts need to reflect the building of a culture of trust and collaboration and learning from failures. And hopefully we can talk about, you know, have podcasts that talks about all the innovations that we're doing that didn't work, you know, but in a way it's because we're learning from it. You know, it's not, there's no failure there. It's just that we're learning from it. So I think that the internal mechanisms the internal podcasts are different from the external podcasts. And the internal podcast, everything that you just said in terms of building that culture of collaboration, of trust, that I don't have to go through all these agreements with my boss before I can say something on an internal podcast. That if I say something that's not precise here or there, that it's okay. You know, I can say in the next podcast that we learn based on the audience that, you know, people are much better at criticizing than building anything. So everybody criticized the podcast because someone said something wrong. Wonderful, Kyle. So we heard you. Thank you for pointing that out. And yeah, you're right. And here's the right solution, the right message that you should have conveyed. I think that internal mechanism is incredibly valuable to start building this culture of excellence and innovation and collaboration and trust.
And this whole idea of a meritocracy of ideas, if that truly exists inside of a company, then perhaps a podcast would be a good, I guess test would be kind of the word I would use of that. Is that is a litmus test of, well, is this actually the case? If this is truly a meritocracy of ideas, can we actually disseminate ideas throughout the company and notch things up another level? So now that it's not just departmental, but truly interdepartmental, and connecting Bob and Kyle and Susie and Jamila
right.
and whoever is, hanging out in the company for those ideas, and then provide a feedback mechanism potentially, which is another thing for internal podcasting that certainly can be done in terms of, now it's not just a outgoing conversation, but now it actually becomes a two-way conversation or a multiple channel conversation, even though something might be being broadcast, so to speak, through one particular channel. And in the realm of maybe not saying things correctly or stumbling over words and all of that, that's what editing's for. Let me just, that's the beautiful part about podcasting, is that it is rarely done live. It is pre-recorded, and it can all get, a lot of that just gets handled to make sure that they do have some agency over what communication is getting out into a larger audience, which I know I certainly understand. Both, my background as a producer and as a former therapist, you do want to have some agency over what you're actually being known for kind of in the world.
I like that. Let me mention on that. I agree with all that was said. And I think it's important that that we on this podcast, I think a specific characteristic of this podcast is that we have to make it light. We have to make it engaging and enjoyable and open. My main concern is that people try to overproduce it or even over edit. I think it's important. It's very important for innovation that we bring our full selves to the work that we do. And it's the everything. It's the good and some of the quirks that we have and that make us unique. It's okay to always with integrity, always with respect for others. But beyond that, there's a level of vulnerability that I think is important in this podcast. And because if we don't have that, how we're going to deal with this fear of failure and lack of trust? We need to start building stronger connections. And I think that part of that is courage. Part of that is vulnerability that gets portrayed and not masked by overproducing podcasts.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's got to sound like people actually having a conversation and not two robots going back and forth. So for a company that might be, new to the idea of this type of communication, what do you think might be some potential use cases for a company that wanted to get started with this type of communication?
Well, so there are multiple categories, but a couple stand out to me as much needed. One is just having a podcast and kind of a general about, let's say our journey of excellence and innovation at our company. And we talk about maybe about opportunities, what's coming up in terms of, we have some master classes happening. We have professionals who have achieved certain levels of proficiency, maybe on some training they received. We can talk about ideas that have been submitted in the last month or so, and kind of give statistics about the program. We can have one that's more like program oriented, if you will, that kind of the program in our organizations and what's going on. So that's one category. That's very important for people. There's so many things going on in organizations, so people know what's happening when it comes to the program for excellence and innovation in our organization. Wonderful. The other category, equally important, is more detail about the projects that we have implemented. Just the projects and the teams, equally important, right? What are the projects, who are the people behind the projects, and talks about interviews and talks about, how did you see that opportunity? What was a challenge to try to get there? What were the results? Just a chat about these different projects. And the reality is that in organizations that have a meritocracy of ideas with clear execution mechanisms, they'll have dozens, hundreds, thousands of these projects. So you're gonna have to select a few, right, to represent that journey and but even a few is wonderful, because as I mentioned before, a lot of organizations don't know what's going on in those projects. They don't even have like a website where you can see the projects that were completed and what they're called. I mean, that sometimes you have to implement some basic things like that, just a website where this is the projects that were completed, these are the teams, and this is what they did. Start there and then build on that with a podcast that highlights some of the interesting projects that are going on. Go for diversity of areas, of teams, of all sorts of interesting things that are going on in this program. So I think there is one that's more related to the program itself, and the other podcast is more focused on the projects and the teams and what they have done.
Perfect. And for a company that does want to kind of take a look at this, what would be the kind of what would they need to know in order to know if it was a good fit for them?
It is a good fit for them.
Jose
just
has
know that
spoken.
You're missing an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
Because I cannot imagine a company that for which this would not be a good fit. Because you're either doing it, and hopefully you're doing well, and you're using these principles that we discussed here of authenticity, collaboration, openness, trust, vulnerability in your podcast. You're not overdoing it. And if you're not doing it, you're missing an incredible opportunity to connect with your professionals. Because, we all have different preferred methods of connecting as well. And I would say that podcasts will hit a pretty big slice of that pie of people who enjoy listening to or watching and listening to a less formal conversation about what's going on. And less formal does not mean that it's disorganized and structured. It can be very structured, just less formal. I think that what people want to know, typically what the audience wants to know about new projects, what the project was about, how did it go and what it achieved and who are the people behind it. You can create that structure, and then having that as a podcast delivery mechanism. I struggle to think of the negative consequences of having that, other than someone's going to have to produce the podcast, and do the interview. So there's a certain amount of time dedicated to that. But I think that the payoff on that time is gigantic, and I can't think of a good reason not to do it.
Well, I think that's kind of the final word on the topic then, in particular.
Well, listen, if you have a culture where there's a bunch of stiffs going around and they think that everything should be communicated by the senior leaders of the organization, they're not going to like this idea, but they're wrong.
So why do you think companies aren't doing this? Why isn't every company doing this already? Is it too new? Do they not know anything? Something else?
There are a lot of companies that have a bunch of stiffs going around who communicate everything for the senior leaders. This is called power and control, and they like it that way. And so they're destined to be mediocre, and that's okay. Most organizations will be mediocre. I'm talking about the pursuit of greatness. If it was easy, anybody would do it. So you have to change who you are and what you become as part of that journey. You have to fight against the fear of failure. You have to fight for collaboration and trust and build an environment where great people and great ideas can connect. It sounds wonderful. It's incredibly hard to do because senior leaders want control. And this does not seem like gives them a lot of control. So if I want to empathize with them for a short period of time, I'll say, yes, we can do this in a way that you don't lose control. You can still have some, because what happens is that they're afraid of losing control. So they're full of fears. So we're going to have a whole discussion, just a podcast on courage. There's very little courage at senior levels.
Yeah.
And what happens is that they got to be at that point because they manage their career. So they are afraid that if you let this kind of in their eyes, almost like a revolution that anybody can say what's going on in the company except coming directly from them. Their egos get hurt because other people may find that Bob is a better speaker than the CEO of the company. Maybe there are more people signing up to the podcast than to the CEO's message. So, their egos get hurt in this process. So you have to kind of you have to know your culture and adapt, and grow over time. Start small and scale. But the biggest resistance will come from senior leaders who are a bit insecure. They'll never admit that, but they're a bit insecure about losing control over some of these messages, and not everything's funneled through them. And in a culture that's highly innovative and like the ones that we're describing in great enduring organizations, that innovation doesn't come from a central figure. It comes from everywhere in the organization. That central, if the leadership is a different style, it's a collaborative leadership style again, which requires you to surround yourself with people from different perspectives who are willing to voice their opinions without fear of retaliation. So that style of collaborative leadership
that's it. And you
deal.
Can't eradicate fear without really digging into your bones that truly control is, at the end of the day, an illusion.